and welcome. This is Krisa with the Graham Chamber of Commerce, and today we have Toby Reddell with Cruz and Reddell, attorney at law, and he's going to be talking with us a little bit about the Families First Coronavirus Act. Of course, this is all new, and we're all kind of learning together on this one, but we are excited to hear some of his thoughts on it and share some of his wisdom with us today. So thank you, Toby, for joining us. I really appreciate it. I also really want to make sure to mention thank you to Pete Clark with Texas Made Security for helping us out on the technical side with these Facebook Lives. He has made this possible. He's excellent to work with. Lots of recommendation and kudos to Pete Clark. So if your organization needs help with any of your video streaming, etc., please give him a call. And I know he'd be happy to work with you. One more announcement, 9:30, I believe, today, the funding will be available on the SBA site for application again. So if your organization didn't make it in last time before that funding was exhausted, be sure to go and apply for that PPP loan or the EIDL loan for your organization. Okay, so Toby, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here. I know you're very, very busy and have a lot going on, so thanks for taking time to be here with us and share with the community. Can you tell us a little bit about the Families First Coronavirus Act?
You bet. So legislation kind of enacted the Family First Coronavirus Act to ensure that people don't have to put their paychecks before public health in a sense. They don't want to put people in the workplace if they actually are in fear of the virus, just because it's an unprecedented time. We don't really know, how to keep it from happening at this point. We're still learning everything. And so I think it's important that the legislation did put this in place because it gives workers some peace of mind, and it also gives some employers some stability and some means of ensuring that their business still stays viable while this is all going on.
Awesome. And is the coronavirus law, is that first year, second year, or third year in law school?
Coronavirus law never occurred in law school, surprisingly, but I wish it did. We've definitely been fielding a lot of questions, some employment law questions, and I'm not going to sit here and give a lot of legal opinions as to the Family First Coronavirus Act, but I just want to make people aware of, what is accessible in the public eye, and what individuals, employers, and employees can do to help themselves.
Absolutely. And with this particular act, when it first came out, I really thought that being an extension of FMLA, it was really a burden on the employer. And maybe that's a wrong word to use, but essentially that the employer would be out the expense to cover those salaries based on these guidelines and these criteria. But can you tell us a little bit about how that act works as far as who's eligible, so on and so forth?
You bet. So from an employer standpoint, anybody in the public and private sector, for the most part, is going to qualify. Of course, one of the highly debated topics right now is that healthcare providers and emergency personnel are not qualified under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act or the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act to receive payment, which, without getting into politics, is a little bit ludicrous. But, if you as an employer do qualify for this, you'll be able to receive some kind of tax incentive or tax rebate at the end. And there's going to be IRS forms for all of that. So it's important to document everything to ensure that you do receive that tax credit at the end of the year.
And so I just want to reiterate, because that's kind of when I found that piece of the information out, I thought, oh, so this is actually not necessarily a negative for employers. It really is a way to protect jobs and help employers also, because if they are short on employees, this is a way for them to recoup in the form of tax credits 100% of that expense that they're having to pay. So kind of, Toby, will you break down what type of leave this provides for, the number of weeks, so on and so forth?
You bet. So the Family First Corona Response Act is kind of bifurcated in that you have the paid sick leave portion of it, and then you have the family and medical leave or expansion portion of it. So the paid sick leave basically covers someone who, one, is in some kind of shelter in place or federally mandated shelter in place, or has been advised by a healthcare provider to quarantine, or is experiencing symptoms and is seeking help from a medical care provider. If you do fall under one of those three categories, then you're entitled to up to 2 weeks pay or 10 working days, 80 total hours, for, to ensure that you can quarantine and for public health concerns. If that's the case, then, there's no application or anything you have to fill out. You literally just need to go to your employer and say, this is the situation. I'm mandated to stay home. We can't work, or I can't work. And then under law, or under this new legislation, they are obligated to pay you full pay for up to 80-hour work week, or 2 40-hour work weeks, pardon me. And then the Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act allows for someone who meets those three criteria, and also someone that is, has children that are in school and don't have proper babysitters or daycare, or someone who's living with someone who's currently quarantined, or is living with someone who has some major symptoms and is seeking healthcare and waiting on to determine if they need to be quarantined. If that's the case, you can get up to 10 weeks of a leave per se, at 2/3 of your normal pay. And so with both of those acts together, you could potentially get up to 12 weeks of paid, I won't say vacation, but paid quarantine stay.
And Toby, just to make sure I understand correctly, so with that additional 10 weeks, that is also available to people who have a child at home who would have normally been in school right now, correct?
You bet. People who have a child at home, or daycare, something along that. And the nice thing about it is that while the first 2 weeks, the paid sick leave, that has to be 2 weeks in a row. The Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act allows, people, it's fluctuates in that, you might have 2 weeks without daycare provider, and then you might have 2 weeks with. So it doesn't have to be all on the same line there. It can break that up, and whatever's easiest. And the legislation put this in effect till December 30th or December 31st of 2020. So it's important for employers and employees to understand that this is probably not going to be the last battle with Corona. So you need to kind of sit down and read the acts, because in the fall, when this thing hits again, like experts are predicting, you can put everything in place in your workplace to ensure that the employees and employers have protection going forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about the eligibility requirements for an employee to be covered under this act?
So for the paid sick leave, it's any employee, pay or full-time or part-time. Now, of course, you're only entitled to how much you work. So if you work 40 hours a work week, you get up to 80 hours over the 2-week period. If you're a part-time employee and only work 20 hours a work week, then you're only entitled to 20 hours per week for the 2 weeks.
And there's a cap, right?
Yes, up to 80 hours. So if you work a lot of overtime, say you work 60 hours the first week, that's great. You get 60 hours pay of normal pay. The second week, you only get 20 hours. So it caps off 50 hours per week.
Sorry, Toby. Isn't there also a cap on the amount that you can be paid, like on a per day basis?
Yes. So for the Paid Sick Leave Act, it's, I believe, $511 per day. And then for the expanded, the medical leave expansion, it's $200 per day. So I know a lot of times what people are doing with FMLA, they have paid sick leave. So for this 10-week period, they're in essence using their paid sick leave for the first 2 weeks and getting their actual pay And then for the following 8 weeks, they're using the Medical Leave Expansion Act and getting up to $200 per day.
And then what about the amount of time an employee has to be with an organization before they qualify for that extension?
So the act went into place April 1st of 2020, and you have to be on the payroll in essence for 30 days. So if you're on the payroll March 2nd of 2020, then you'll qualify for this, but you have to be on the payroll for up to 30 days. And something we didn't talk about earlier in terms of what kind of employer qualifies for this act. It's important to note that one of the big exceptions to this is businesses under 50 employees don't necessarily have to comply with this act, just because if you have 4 employees in your office, a la De La Cruz and Reddell, and 2 of them cannot be there, or 3 of them cannot be there and choose to stay at home under this act, then it could really affect the business's viability and ability to stay alive.
For sure. And on that note, Toby, kind of one of the things that I read anyway, so I'd like to ask about it, is that for employers who do have less than 50 employees, they could be an exception if they meet certain criteria, and they have to, I think, apply for that exception. Is that correct?
There is no application process whatsoever. I think they really just need to document everything. I mean, if they decide to, not follow this act, then, you don't have to apply to the Department of Labor or anything like that. You really just need to document everything as to why you're choosing not to, because if an employee who does apply for this decides to try to enforce this with the Department of Labor, then there's going to be some kind of hearing on the matter, and you want to have documentation in place as your defense. And specifically on the small business exceptions, the provision of paid sick leave or expanded family medical leave would result in the business's expenses and financial obligations exceeding available business revenues, or the absence of the employee will entail substantial risk to the business itself. So, I mean, I'm not going to say those are hard things to document, but you definitely need to show the employee's importance and what the employee's absence would do to the viability of your business.
Absolutely. I had a call last week or the week before with one of our chamber members, and we were talking about this particular act. And, I said, hey, I'm probably not the right person to ask, but I have read it and I'll tell you my opinion of what it says. But the way I read it, it was going to be very difficult probably to claim an exception on that, just based on that criteria as it was written. But I also am not sure what the downside is per se, other than fronting the revenue and then getting that reimbursement. And then, of course, having an employee out that you're counting on in your office. But financially, with 100% of it being reimbursed via tax credits, it has the potential to actually save an organization some money and allow them to keep an employee who may have maybe otherwise they wouldn't have been able to keep. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, and I think you're weighing public health concerns at the same time. And a lot of businesses who have less than 50 employees might be strapped for cash at this time because they're service industries or something like that, and they might not have been able to get the SBA loan through the first get-go. So, they might have to stay open, and it might not be feasible for them to work on their own without their employees in the office. So I can see it from both ways, but I think, if you as a company were able to get the SBA loan and, your employees are legitimately concerned about their public health and things like that, then I think you really need to weigh that, because it's really going to change, your employees' perception of you maybe as a business.
For sure. And I know we have quite a few people viewing and watching with us. I just want to say thank you to all of you who are tuning in, so to speak. But also don't forget to post your questions in the comments. Our goal today is to stump Toby because he loves it when we do that. So no, really, but put your questions in there. If it's not something we can answer during this live, then we'll try to follow up with a response or get back with you when we do have an answer. So ask away. And also thank you to Y100.5 for broadcasting on the radio. We appreciate that as well. So one of the things that I have the most questions on personally, Toby, is how I know you said to document, but those steps in actually obtaining that reimbursement. And I'm assuming what's the proper, I guess, profession, that you would use to help walk a business through that?
Walk a business through what? Can you repeat your question?
Getting that reimbursement, that tax credit.
Well, of course, I don't handle any tax law. I'm a C in tax law, so I'm not going to sit there and give you tax advice. I think if you would contact your local CPA, I'm sure that they could direct you to that IRS form. And with that IRS form, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of spaces in there for you to document, dates and everything along that line to ensure you get reimbursed the tax credit up to 10 weeks or however long the employee was out.
Awesome. And hopefully we'll see more literature coming out about that. I think most of what we've seen so far has been on these guidelines and the criteria and kind of what the business needs to do to follow this act. But I haven't seen much about how to get those credits back. So hopefully we'll see more of that. We can do, maybe one of our CPA members will do another call with us later on and kind of walk people through that. But so when businesses are going through that process of documentation and then receiving that payroll tax credit, they would go through their CPA though for help and advice on that, correct?
I would definitely CPA. And once again, this is also unprecedented. The Department of Labor hasn't really been enforcing any of these applications in essence from employees where employers haven't been following these guidelines. They didn't actually start taking enforcement actions until I want to say April 17th, just to give employers some time to get a feel for all this. So I'm sure you'll start getting some literature and finding everything out in the next couple of weeks once they start having these what I would presume to be Zoom hearings on enforcement actions of this act.
Awesome. So what about, and I think you covered this a little bit, but what about employees who are trying to request this type of leave? What are their steps to take?
It's literally just, talking to your employer, letting them know, giving them some kind of upfront notice saying, this is my situation. Of course, everyone knows what the lockdowns and the shutdowns are going on right now, but it's kind of, you're walking a thin line from an employer standpoint if you start questioning too much in regards to HIPAA and things like that. So I think from an employer standpoint, I think it's good to, have a sit down conversation with your employee who's requesting this. We can, whether or not you're an essential employee, with whether you've been advised by a healthcare professional to actually quarantine, good practice to, rather than asking what the symptoms are, to say, who was your healthcare provider that advised you to do this? Because if there is a hearing on the enforcement of this, at least, you've inquired and can discuss that with a healthcare professional if it comes to. And then, of course, as an employee, if you go in there and say, oh, well, I have the symptoms, well, that's not enough. You need to do something, another overt action to show that you have the symptoms and that you sought some kind of healthcare diagnosis. And if that is the case, if you have sought a healthcare diagnosis, then I think that's, you have the right under this act to seek this paid sick leave and the extra time off because you have children of a certain age. And I think as an employee, just provide the employer as much information as you feel comfortable with doing.
We did get a question, Toby, and I'm going to take a stab at answering it, but I want you to correct me or agree, disagree, whatever. But we had someone ask, why are healthcare workers exempt? And I'm assuming that's because healthcare workers are the most exposed, theoretically, to this virus. So if everyone who had been exposed was going to quarantine, our healthcare system would completely shut down.
Well, that and
I mean, possibly.
if every healthcare worker decided to take off because their child was out of school or they couldn't have daycare, then we'd really be in shambles. So, you know, while I don't necessarily agree with it, I don't know that there's a feasible alternative at this time to give them the same opportunities under the Paid Sick Leave Act and the Medical Leave Expansion Act as someone who's not in the healthcare or not a emergency provider.
It's a good time to remember to thank your healthcare workers, I think, for what they're doing. And when you think about that and them not being eligible for this type of leave, we just need to remember to appreciate what they do for us, I think. We delivered care packages a few weeks ago, and I think that a lot of different community members pitched in to make that possible, a lot of different businesses, and I think those were well received. And I think it kind of took them by surprise because they're not used to receiving that type of appreciation. But we should always be appreciative of our healthcare providers. But right now, I think especially they're on the front lines, they're most at risk. And then at the same time, they're the ones not eligible for this type of leave and pay. So paid leave, I should say. So anyway, seems like a thank you is in order, to say the least.
Absolutely. I mean, healthcare workers, I mean, it's essential employees, period. I mean, I know a lot of businesses are going to try to claim that they're under 50 employees so that they meet the exception potentially. And so, a lot of the restaurants in town potentially, or grocery stores and Walmart and things like that, which Walmart is a corporation over 500 people, so they wouldn't qualify for. But a lot of these smaller places, I mean, they're in the eyes too. So very appreciative of all of them.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of depends on your perspective on that, because on one hand, we look at healthcare workers and all of the essential businesses and at being the ones who are staying open and being most at risk of coming into contact, and obviously very appreciative. And then on the other hand, you look at the businesses considered non-essential, which I hate that word, but regardless, non-essential, and they're sacrificing so much too. And so I think, we're all kind of playing our part in one way or the other, but fortunately in Graham specifically, and I'll say Young County really, I think we've done a really good job of working together, our essential, non-essential, our healthcare systems, our governments. I think we've done a really good job. So that was not the point of this specific meeting, but thanks for letting me derail a little bit. So Toby, what about any advice that you have for employees or employers?
I think communication is going to be key here. You can look on the Department of Labor websites and print off forms, to put at your office, and have a meeting at your office to discuss avenues for employees. And, if something is to come up in the fall, go ahead and prepare in advance. Let them have some kind of measure, let them know what the measures are to qualify under this act and what you expect out of them as employees in terms of notice and things like that, to ensure that everything runs smoothly and that you're not going to put the business in jeopardy, but at the same time, you're ensuring that if they do feel like public health or their health is in jeopardy, that they're comfortable with that at the same time.
I was just sure when I asked you about advice, you were going to talk about how to improve your golf swing during shelter in place or something. I feel a little bit let down by your professionalism right now, Toby.
No, I don't like to walk and play golf, so I'm just thankful that the country club finally decided to get the golf course back.
Yay. Okay, well, Toby, we appreciate you very much. I don't think we have any more questions so far, but we'll obviously keep monitoring that Facebook page and watch for questions to come up. And one of us, either I'll get with Toby and respond, or Toby can respond directly on that page. But do just want to make sure and say thank you so much. I know you serve this community in a multitude of ways, one being on the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors as incoming president, but also, I'm not going to try to list them, but you're involved in a bunch of other things as well. So thank you for always being willing to step up and volunteer and lead. And we appreciate you very much. And I know the community's thankful that you were willing to spend some time to educate us.
You bet. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, have a great day, Toby. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.